projects and investments should be guided by economic considerations. And it's also, from the beginning, we've had a mandate to foster regional cooperation within Asia. We have 67 member countries, 48 are from the region. In terms of size, we're about 3,000 staff, so we're about a quarter the size of the World Bank. But most of those staff are not in knowledge and research work. So we're a little tiny fraction of the overall bank. So our research department, including national staff, is about 100 people. And you would have about 200 people in other sorts of knowledge roles outside of operations. And I'll explain what we mean by operations in a slide or two. What we give is, it's rising every year. Last year, we had a record $32 billion of new investment commitments, including co-finance, which is about half what the World Bank gives for the whole World Bank group globally. And this is just for the region. We have operations that are both with the public sector and private sector operations, so we're not like the World Bank where they're different banks. And we have our long-term vision of an Asia free of poverty. We just formulated our new strategy 2030, which changes the orientation of the bank. We used to talk a lot about sectors and themes. And even in strategy 2020, I don't know if you might have heard, we tried to drop agriculture basically, and we made agriculture sort of an other issue that we work on rather than a priority. Now it's come full circle, and our operational priorities, you don't see very many sectors or themes there. You see addressing poverty, addressing gender inequality, tackling climate change, and enhancing environmental sustainability, making cities livable. Rural development and food security is back as a core priority, strengthening governance and institutional capacity, and fostering regional integration. So it's a difference. You know, we've been an infrastructure bank, but there's nothing about infrastructure here now. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of the institutional structure, but I did just want to explain one thing. The way the bank works, we have our research department here, and we also have a sort of knowledge department there that convenes the sectors. This is not what we call operations. What we call operations, when you hear that phrase later in my presentation, this is where the projects are and where most of the money is, and it's organized around regions, and it has sectors within the regions. So you'll see that things are a little bit separated sometimes in the way they work. So what do we actually do? What do we offer? Well, we offer, we're a bank. So our main products in terms of volume are in terms of financial products. So we finance concrete projects where there's a very defined project, there's a procurement plan, everything is in detail about the specific project, and we're involved in all the decisions about who's hired to do what, et cetera. We also have products that get away from that level of control. So we have sector loans where we set the criteria with the government, and then the government picks projects according to a prioritization process we've defined. We have financial intermediation where we put money into banking systems, and then financial institutes are the ones who find the sub-borrowers. We have results-based lending where we actually pay for, not for a discrete project and get involved in procurement decisions, but we instead basically have a list of achievements that the government is supposed to do, and they're supposed to do so many kilometers of road and such location, and that's the basis of lending. What is actually done as outputs rather than the inputs. We have policy-based lending where you've probably heard of as structural adjustment lending, where basically there's a reform matrix for policies, and then a loan is dispersed when the criteria are met. And then finally, we also have private sector products that can be much wider. They can be equity stakes in companies. They can be guarantees to reduce sovereign risk, et cetera. And then we also have different interest rates for different clients. So if for most of our borrowers, we make money on the loans, so it puts an incentive for us to have more operations and get bigger, because we basically borrow, we're AAA credit rated, we borrow from the market at LIBOR, the interbank borrowing rate, and we pass on the loan marked up at 0.5%. So that is different from our concessional lending for the poorest countries, where we give a below market guaranteed long-term interest rate, or even grants if a country can't borrow. And it's also different from commercial borrowers, the private sector. The breakdown of what is in this pie, it still mirrors much of the breakdown of the overall bank rather than being something very different. It's more how things are done than what is done. So just a few examples of some of the kinds of projects that we do, projects that might be a little bit different. We have extensive investments in improving energy efficiency on the demand side, changing electricity pricing policies. So for example, in India, we have a $400 million project where we're separating the subsidized electricity for farmers from electricity that will be priced for households. We have another project that's coming on to expand that kind of program. We have another program in India where the idea is to promote knowledge of energy efficient technologies and behaviors and to reduce energy on the demand side as well. We have an increasing number of waste-to-energy kinds of projects, and some of them have quite interesting integration. So, for example, we have a substantial rural waste-to-energy project in China. We are addressing more as livable cities. It would be an increasing focus in the future on solid waste management, innovative ways to do solid waste management, such as including communities in solid waste collection systems. We have new combinations of renewable and clean energy and addressing other kinds of problems, such as solar-powered sewage treatment plants in India combined with sanitation campaigns. We have a project I'll talk a little bit more about later, computerized volumetric irrigation in Bangladesh. We have solar irrigation projects in Bangladesh, and in Nepal, we're also thinking about how is the interaction between, say, a net metering and a feed-in tariff and water use for irrigation. So there are a lot of exciting things that you find going on in the bank. You have to dig through to find the details. Actually, every project we have is on our website, so if you want to see, you can easily go and look it up. So that's just some examples of projects. It's, economics and social science has an incredibly important role in terms of testing and focusing all of these kinds of projects, something I'll come back to later in this presentation. The other thing as an interaction with policy, I think that is worth noting as well is our policy-based lending product, because policy-based lending we've traditionally thought of as something quite boring. It's kind of general budget support, or it's structural adjustment lending. It's lending when a country goes through a macroeconomic downturn to meet development expenditure needs. But it's changed in recent years with some of the new PBLs, because some of the new PBLs are actually focused on environmental policy reforms. And so I think this is something that, thinking through what the key environmental policy reforms, what is needed, what's optimal, what the effects are of those reforms, is something where we could also benefit from some of the kinds of expertise you might have in this room. So, we've all heard about the air quality problems that exist around Beijing, right? So we have a policy-based loan that has a reform matrix about things that are supposed to be done to reduce that particulate matter emissions, and a whole list of very detailed actions and policies. We have a similar kind of loan in Ulaanbaatar. We also get involved in power systems and power sector reforms and liberalization and all kinds of changes that more analytical power could be brought to. Just to give as a very simple example, this is just a very public document, goes with all the policy-based loans, but you would see there are, very detailed actions that then get fleshed out even in more detail in documents that aren't public, that are expected to address the environmental problem, and they may or may not be exactly the right instruments from an economic point of view, but that's where your kinds of expertise could help. So if we go back to the kind of conventional project cycle and we think about what can be contributed by economists, also by environmental economists, I think it is important to bring in that economics is part of what we do. It's not always done as well as it should be done, but it's always there in the cycle of how we do things. So as I mentioned, our charter says that all our decision making should be guided by economic considerations. We have a project cycle that basically it starts on the countryside, and it would have we have diagnostics of constraints to growth in different economies that are supposed to underpin then, in concert with reviews of what's going on in different sectors, a pipeline of projects. So that sets the context for deciding a long list of projects that goes into what we call our COBP. For each of those projects, then we have this economic analysis process during the project preparation. And that includes a whole bunch of different kinds of analyses, but also, in most cases, estimation of an internal rate of return, an economic internal rate of return. We also have, for most projects, a midterm review where a lot of things get redesigned. For many projects, they invest actually in substantial baseline surveys, usually, unfortunately, not with real impact evaluation methods, but they can be still substantial baselines to understand the context and then to do a reflexive comparison to see what's changed to project completion. We also re-estimate all our rates of return at project completion, and that's part of the way we judge the success of projects, and that feeds into the overall evaluation process. I mention that because this is something where you can actually do a lot of tweaking of projects if you do the economic analysis correctly. And what we do in terms of economic analysis actually should be drawing on methodological innovations you're working on in many cases. So as I said, every project has to hurdle a rate of return requirement. We have two rates of return requirements. One is 9% for most of the investments, and then in special cases where it's for the environment, where it's targeting poor populations, et cetera, we allow it to be 6%. But the economic internal rate of return is not the only thing we do as economic analysis of investments. We actually say we have 10 key areas of economic analysis. I don't know if you can see the slide because the screen is a little bit small, but we say that you have to do country context analysis from an economic perspective, analysis of the sector in the country. The rationale for the project should always be defined in economic terms. Why does the public sector need to do it? What is the market failure that you're addressing? Demand analysis of whether the output is actually needed, whether it will be used. Alternatives analysis, so you're supposed to compare what is the least cost alternative of meeting the demand that's been identified, or at least use some other way of prioritizing to get to the sort of best option before you go into rate of return analysis. We have rate of return analysis with very stringent guidelines about what's done. You have to do sustainability analysis. Will the benefits be sustained like in the manner projected in the rate of return analysis? We have distribution analysis and calculation of a poverty impact ratio off the rate of return. And then you're supposed to also put what you get out. It's a lot, but we also expect a consultant to do this in maybe 2-3 months of time. So from an academic point of view, it may sound kind of challenging. And then you add into the mix that for our projects, an increasing number of our project components, because as I said that it's 60% of our projects are considered oriented towards environmental sustainability. A lot of these projects are creating non-market benefits that then need to be included in the economic analysis. And this can be very challenging, and this is where we could benefit from your kinds of expertise. So we have, in China, an increasing and very large number of projects that are to improve water quality, that are for watershed protection. They're investing billions of dollars in terms of trying to improve the quality of their rivers. We have waste and sewage management projects that establish parks and green space for recreational values, coastal protection, pollution reduction oriented projects, et cetera, et cetera. And in many cases, these are really important benefit streams, but they're also not the only benefit stream as well, which makes it another evaluation challenge. What we do right now, we have a fairly limited pool of consultants who know our system and do this kind of work. And it's very difficult to budge them out of the box of conventional contingent valuation. So we actually do dozens of contingent valuation studies in a year, not particularly well, but they're done. So I tell people in operations that they should try choice modeling, they should try other approaches. It's very, very difficult to get them to do that because you've got the 2-month time or 3-month time for the consultant who doesn't want to make a mistake and then exceed their number of days. But I think it's a perfect area for potential future collaboration. When the contingent valuation exercises, sorry, good now? Okay. Okay, I have to go a little bit faster. Okay, so I'll go quite quickly. We also are trying to work on some particular issues. We don't allow value of statistical life right now, so we're working on a database, drawing on the OECD's work that was done some years ago. We're trying to update a global database of value of statistical life to come up with a value to use in economic analysis. But that's enough about project economic analysis for the moment. I'll now just touch on what we do in terms of technical assistance, knowledge work on the environment. I did a little search last night, and I found in our project management database that we have over 100 active technical assistance projects on the environment at the moment. So it's impossible to summarize 100 in a few minutes. But I can say it addresses a wide range of topics from the potential of advanced energy technologies through to valuing natural capital payment for environmental services and a whole array of topics that are similar to what you work on. I'll give just a few examples just to give a flavor, but there's much, much more. For example, we have a long history of work with the People's Republic of China on eco-compensation and payment for environmental services. We've done work, analytical work, looking at what they're doing. We've had a knowledge hub that's extending practices elsewhere in the region. We've looked at the mechanisms in various specific contexts, including private sector payment for watershed protection and services, integration with the social protection system. I don't know, it's asking, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? I guess yes. Okay. We've had 7 international conferences on eco-compensation. We're also advising on the 14th five-year development plan for China on the basis of this body of work. I don't know how many people here in the room have heard of the GMS program, the Greater Mekong subregion. We have a long-standing technical assistance project that works on integration in the region. It's been going on for over 25 years, on the environment for maybe 15 years. And it brings together the 6 main countries around the Mekong subregion. It convenes the environment ministers. It does strategic environmental assessment work, builds capacity for strategic environmental assessment, and it's actually gotten involved in drafting some of the key policies for the countries, such as Cambodia's National Environmental Strategy and Action Plan, the Pollution Control Strategy for Lao PDR, the evaluation framework for payment for environmental services here in Vietnam, etc. We have had, to come closer to my department and some of the things we've been working on, we've had a series of modeling exercises looking at climate change, the impacts of climate change mitigation. We've done it with a range of models, integrated assessment models, dynamic optimization models, etc. We've looked at the Paris Agreement, alternative scenarios going forward from the Paris Agreement, effects on air quality of those kinds of scenarios, etc. Okay, so now there's the least time for the topic closest to my heart. So I will just, I'll try to skim through this very quickly, but give a very quick flavor before I conclude. My division and department, we also are the locus of impact evaluation within the Asian Development Bank. This includes both experiments and quasi-experimental designs. We administer funding to the regional departments. We work with the regional departments and national governments in different ways. It ranges from advising national governments on their funded impact evaluations to doing our own kinds of impact evaluation studies. So we're behind the World Bank in impact evaluation, but we are trying to ramp up. We have a portfolio of I think I counted 16, 17 studies here, including studies on transport, rural roads, urban roads, and transport interventions targeted to women, energy, social protection, education, and then agriculture, and agriculture related to the environment. So I'll just mention a few details about a few of the latter category studies in the 30 seconds I have left. So we have a brand new study that we're finalizing right now. It's quite exciting. It's the first, I think, real impact evaluation done in Myanmar outside of health. So we have a project. The project is what we would euphemistically call within ADB a Christmas tree because it has many components. But in this case, that the project has many components, works many locations, offers actually an exciting opportunity because the executing agency, the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation and Livestock in Myanmar, has agreed to do pipeline randomization of different permutations of the interventions. And so we can do a really interesting pipeline randomized controlled trial. We're still sorting out what the most exciting combinations are, but we've got already funding to do 6,000 household surveys, 3 times covering hundreds of villages, and in principle agreement on pipeline randomization. So now it's just a matter of making the best use of what we have. I'm just completing a quasi-experimental study looking at funding going into farmer groups and cooperatives in Nepal and a range of outcomes from that kind of work. It's a mainstay of support in Nepal, and you know, we were just playing with the data yesterday afternoon. I think we'll have some quite exciting results. And then finally, we have, as I mentioned about the computerized irrigation, we're doing an impact evaluation. It's a perfect natural experiment in that these are small schemes where they're putting in computerized prepaid pumps. They're dotted throughout the irrigation command area, so the schemes that come online later are interspersed with all the schemes that come online first, so there's not a big selection bias issue. And so we can look at the effects of installation of these computerized prepaid pumps through a quasi-experimental design in the shorter run. And then because the pumps are computerized and linked into a central server, we can do an experiment on varying the pricing and also varying exposure to water-saving technology to see the interaction effect. And we can measure the exact water usage off the pumps because they're computerized and they have varied pipe distribution to individual plots. Okay, so this is the final slide. I thank you for your patience first thing in the morning on the second day of the conference. I think there are a lot of exciting opportunities to potentially work together. As I mentioned, we have a wide array of technical assistance activities related to the environment that often have a policy component. We would like to strengthen our evaluation of non-market benefits and introduce new techniques. We have an expanding impact evaluation portfolio, and we're always on the lookout for exciting opportunities. The question that we always get in the research department is to have more impact evaluation that aligns with most of what we do, so more related to transport, energy, et cetera. But there's also, you have very exciting opportunities with some of these interventions. Not everything's a big and uniform intervention that has general equilibrium effects in energy or transport. So I think that when you dig into these sectors, you can do very exciting things. The same would also be with water. So ideas on potential impact evaluation studies. Our portfolio is easy to find on the web, so you can look through. If you find a project you think is exciting, you can approach me or my colleagues. The other thing we also have, and as a new program in my department, is we also support visiting research fellows, which would be people to come for a short period of time, you know, share their work with us and try and contribute to what we're doing and understand a bit more about us. It could be as short as a couple weeks, it could be months, but it's a kind of flexible program and people can apply for it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, my email address is up on the screen, and thank you for your time.